Hello everyone! Welcome to yet another weekend white pill, though the white pill in this video will take some time to get to, as we are going to need to go over some more details about a particular person. And that particular person is Ngozi Fulani, which isn't actually her real name as it turns out. But again, we'll get into that. For those of you that missed it, I will give you a catch-up on one of my latest videos, in which Ms Fulani was invited to Buckingham Palace to meet some royals, met Lady Suzanne Hussey, who asked where she was really from, which, if you are dressed like that, of course you're going to be asked that, and it became a whole race row thing. But I looked at everyone else around this issue rather than Ngozi Fulani, and that was to my detriment, because there's actually quite a lot to go into here, and we are going to get through it all today. So, Ngozi Fulani, who is the woman at the centre of the royal race row? And according to the Times, she actually met the king 25 years ago when she was running an African arts and culture organisation in Hackney. So once again, asking where she is really from really isn't an insulting question, it is just one out of general interest. Ngozi Fulani's history with the royal family began 25 years ago when she met the king, then Prince Charles, at an event for the Prince's Trust. She was running the Amashi Dance Ensemble, an African arts and culture organisation in Hackney, East London. Photos from the royal visit in December 1997 show Charles and Fulani laughing while playing bongo drums. I remember it very clearly, it was such a lovely experience, Fulani, 61, who is a widow and grandmother, told the Times. He sat down next to me and asked me to show him some rhythms on the drums, which I did. I had my daughter with me, she was 18 months old at the time, he was very courteous and it was a lovely experience. So I wonder what changed, what could possibly have changed from 1997 to 2022. The next time Fulani and the royals would be connected, the circumstances would be much different. When the Duchess of Sussex told Oprah Winfrey last year that a member of the royal household had commented on the potential colour of her son Archie's skin before he was born, Fulani accused the royals of domestic violence against Meghan. She tweeted, "I can't stay silent about this. I admire Meghan for speaking out. According to clear definition, it seems Meghan is a survivor of domestic violence from her in-laws." Incredible. Growing up in Kilburn, northwest London, to parents who had come to Britain from Barbados as part of the Windrush generation, Fulani was the only black family on the street in a predominantly Irish area of the capital. Racism was part of her life from an early age, she said in an interview with Future Hackney. When she was 11, a white teacher shooed her away because she was sitting too close to her, she said. Her father would take her to house parties because black people were not allowed in pubs. I mean, I've been shooed away by teachers before and I'm white. And I also know that black people are allowed in pubs, I've seen one. At 18, she moved to Hackney and took a college course in community studies. In 1982, she became involved with Amashi, a movement that she describes as pivotal because it put me in touch with Africans from the continent. Again then, it's no wonder she is asked where she really comes from. She set up Sister Space, a charity supporting African and Caribbean heritage victims of domestic violence in the wake of the murder of Valerie Ford and her baby by an ex-partner in Hackney in 2014. An investigation later concluded that the victims were badly let down by police, with 2 detective sergeants found guilty of misconduct. That's just the Met Police being the Met Police. They all seem to be god-awful. Fulani trained as an independent domestic violence advocate, founding Sister Space in 2015 with Roseanne Lewis. It works to ensure cultural factors are not only considered but understood, and that cultural barriers and biases are removed. So from that fairly value-free analysis of Ngozi Fulani's life, it would seem that she is quite a charitable person with quite an ethnocentric view on life. Hence she joined African arts and culture activities and clubs, and she set up Sister Space in supporting African and Caribbean women who are victims of domestic violence. And if that was it, I wouldn't have too much of a problem. I mean, obviously I have a big problem with her saying that the royal families were domestically abusive to Meghan. I simply don't believe that. But it's just a silly opinion, and if it was that, I would have just left it and not made this video. However, the story indeed does continue. Ngozi Fulani's charity Sister Space stops work over safety. A charity led by a black woman who was repeatedly asked where she was really from at a royal event has temporarily stopped its work over safety. Sister Space was thrown into the spotlight when its founder, Ngozi Fulani, said that she felt she was interrogated by Lady Suzanne Hussey at Buckingham Palace last month. She wasn't so bloody difficult, she'd have it over and done with and wouldn't be in problems that she is in now. And I don't mean problems of having to stop work at Sister Space. Obviously, abuse to these women and the women working at Sister Space should not be happening. It is wrong. It says it has now ceased many of its operations over safety. Ms Fulani said she suffered online abuse after speaking out. Lady Hussey, Prince William's godmother and the late Queen's lady-in-waiting, has since left her honorary role within the royal household. That is something that we have gone through before, and once again I stand by my statement that absolutely should not be happening. She should be able to keep her job. She did nothing wrong. In a statement on its Instagram page, domestic violence charity Sister Space said, "Thank you for the continued support and messages. Unfortunately, recent events meant that we are forced to temporarily cease many of our operations to ensure the safety of our service users and our team. We are overwhelmed by the amount of support and encouragement and look forward to fully reinstating our services as soon and as safely as possible." Ms. Fulani said earlier this week that she and her family and team had been put under immense pressure and received horrific abuse on social media. And that's all the news has to say on it, by the way. She claims she's been under immense pressure and horrific abuse on social media. There's not actually been any evidence of that, beyond people saying, well, she wasn't being racist, what are you talking about? Stop being stupid. Which, given that she thinks that Meghan claiming that someone in the royal family asked what colour the baby will be is domestic violence, I wouldn't be surprised if she thought people talking about her amounted to horrific abuse on social media, but there we go. Anyway, the rest of the article is just going through the rest of the story that we've already gone through in the past video. So, it's time to get on to the meat and potatoes of the video. Charity and Royal Racewell facing donations inquiry. Yes, the Watchdog has now got its eyes on Sister Space after this entire ordeal, and from the looks of what we're going to go through, I'd be surprised if they don't find anything. The charity at the centre of Buckingham Palace Racewell could find an official investigation into its finances after claims were made online, by an anonymous account, by the way. God bless that hero. The Charity Commission is assessing allegations that Sister Space, an African and Caribbean domestic violence charity, misspent donations. The Greater London Assembly is re-examining whether thousands of pounds in grant funds given to the charity were used as intended. A post on Twitter went viral this week, making claims about the charity used donations. The Commission has said it is assessing material posted on social media about the charity Sister Space to determine whether it raises matters that falls within its remit. If it believes there are grounds for further inquiries, it could begin a regulatory compliance case or statutory inquiry. The thread on Twitter, containing almost 200 posts, and in fact goes way over it at this point, highlights 2 GLA grants to Sister Space worth £12,000 and £40,000. And, well, I mean, if you're going to race grift, it's not that far-fetched to assume that you're also going to grift when it comes to money. And given that the Twitter thread is hundreds of tweets long, the Times only goes through one specific claim here. I will obviously go through a bit more, but let's get to the end of this one. Neil Garrett, chairman of the GLA audit panel, said that these are unproven allegations, but part of this thread mentions 2 5-figure grants from the GLA, which may not have been used as intended. I've spoken to the GLA finance chief this morning and asked them to be looked into. I felt that it was my duty to act. Others may see it differently, and I realise this sounds boringly old-fashioned, but in my defence I am conservative and actually do believe this stuff. I like how his defence is, I'm conservative and think money should be spent properly, implies that every other ideology doesn't think money should be spent properly, or money given for one intention in a grant should be spent the way that they are told it is going to be spent. No, that isn't conservative, that's just basic human decency. In 2019, the GLA gave Sister Space £12,000 to run a poll. I mean, that alone is incredible. How does it take £12,000 to run a poll? The anonymous Twitter author claimed the survey was a 10-minute job that would not have cost that much. The second grant, worth £40,000, was made to the charity in 2020 using its registration number, but was allegedly labelled as being given to an organisation under a different name, Royal Doc. Garrett said that the investigation into the grants would seek to establish whether the money was given to Sister Space under a different name, or whether it was an administrative error, or whether the money's just gone entirely and wasn't used for any purpose, as they stated. The charity, which operates throughout London, registered total income of £363,506 for the financial year ending March last year, including 2 government contracts worth £52,346. This compares with more than £50,000 in 2019. So their income went up 6-fold, 7-fold even. The Charity Commission's website says that the year's financial report was received almost 70 days late. The latest trustee report, signed by Fulani, said the delay was caused by organisers being overwhelmed by the charity's fast growth. Well, I mean, I suppose that's understandable. And it added that the chief finance officer has been off for a very long time due to COVID issues. Again, believable stuff, but it's up to the charity Watchdog to see if these claims are true. So that is just what the Greater London Assembly are doing with these allegations. So, as mentioned, there is an anonymous Twitter account called Just Pikachu that compiled a hell of a long Twitter thread into some things that he found in the, as he calls it, Sister Space rabbit hole. And here is just part of his introduction. It is natural for us to be curious. Initially, on face value, donating to a domestic violence charity is something I'm happy to do, but before any charitable commitments, I've always conducted due diligence to see how funds are used and to what benefit. And this is where the rabbit hole begins, that I'm sure Sister Space and its members who incontrovertibly bear responsibility will undoubtedly come to regret as self-orchestrated attention. Full disclosure before I go any further, I've downloaded and made copies of all multimedia source codes, and I'm still working on compiling it into a legible PDF file to submit to relevant agencies, because the reporting system in the UK are restrictive and limited. So if you have to be reading this thread, and this applies to you, if you start wondering what I've seen something online, and you are considering rushing to delete it, let me save you the bother by telling you that the chances are that I already have it now, as I have been for over the past week. I am not going to upload the PDF itself, as that is intended for different purposes. So yes, without a doubt, this is Anonymous Autism on Twitter doing God's work. So let's go through some particular parts that I found interesting. Initially, I believe that Sister Space started in 2018 at the time of its registration with the Charity Commission. However, I later came to realise that in fact it began in 2015, as can be seen on various YouTube videos uploaded by members of the charity. It's also rather suspect that in all this time, Sister Space did not think to utilise accountancy services. For one, the financial reports submitted by Sister Space appear to be cash-based rather than accrual. When a charity gross income exceeds £25,000, this is required. I was also flabbergasted and dumbfounded when I read that the trustee annual report that the finance officer for Sister Space was overwhelmed by the workload from a self-proclaimed small charity and did not understand how to do charitable accounting once income exceeds a certain threshold. Quite honestly, this stunned me. Any benefit of the doubt I could extend to Sister Space after reading a statement about that effect instantly vanished. In other words, they were a cash-based charity when they weren't supposed to be, and they hired an accountant that didn't know how to do accountancy properly, or at least claimed to. So therefore, James here could not give them any benefit of the doubt, because it is such a stupid thing to do for a charity that is in any way serious. And the accountancy situation gets even worse. What exacerbated this further was when I read that 3 different scenarios provided by Sister Space as to who was maintaining accounting, all from one trustee annual report. In one scenario, it was the accounts manager who was initially off for COVID reasons and subsequently retired that handling the accounting. In another scenario, it was the trustees, through these same trustees, who were said to have been absent for personal reasons in the same trustee annual report. In the other scenario, it was the poor soul who didn't understand accounting once gross income reached a certain threshold. On immediate face value, it looks pretty bad when most of the time accounts are submitted and filed late. In other words, there is gross incompetence, or this gross incompetence is trying to cover for something else. But this incompetence has knock-on effects. So one name that popped up often when it came to the political space for Sister Space was Caroline Pidgeon in the London Assembly. On 11th of December 2020, Caroline was pushing the ambitions of Sister Space with the political sphere, though this was to do with exceptionally high demands made by Sister Space during the pandemic. Caroline informed the London Assembly that Sister Space had seen a 300% increase in demand for its services since the start of the pandemic, and this equates to a 1-year period. The only place that figure of 300% has ever been mentioned is within the trustee annual report, which would lead any rational person to suspect that this is where Caroline saw such information, which is striking. However, is that this would be the same report where Sister Space professes a multitude of compliance failures, failures in adhering to UK accounting standards, and much, much more. I find it inconceivable that somebody could read such information, which was presented in plain English, albeit written poorly, but still understandable, and still be of the opinion that this is suitable to receive monetary funding. So this London Assembly member was pushing for public funding of Sister Space because she was seeing in a completely and utterly incompetent finance report where basic compliance within the UK can't even be met, that there is a number of 300% increase in demand. And yet, despite all the other problems within the report, there was no due diligence, and this was just pushed by this particular Lib Dem Assembly member. You've got to love local government, it's just the best. Anyway, next up is why I should have taken a closer look into Gláeddyv Fulani's past and her politics, because I thought that she was just a woman trying to do good, and that might not be true. Another politician that appears frequently on the scene, spanning over a very, very long period, is none other than our own national mathematician, Diane Abbott. Gláeddyv Fulani belongs to what is typically described as the hard left. She has long attended various political engagements of Diane Abbott and Jeremy Corbyn over many years prior. Diane Abbott has frequently lobbied various political arenas on behalf of Sister Space with the aim of securing what the charity wants, and to be clear, it wants a lot. I should clear up, however, I write Gláeddyv Fulani. Keep in mind that this could also mean Ngozi Headley Fulani. Marlene Headley, Marlene Fulani, Mary Headley, Mary Fulani, Mary Headley Fulani, or Sister Ngozi. For avoidance of any doubt, these are all the same person. Now again, there is actually no proof or conviction of wrongdoing here. However, it is perfectly reasonable to be suspicious of a person who constantly changes her name and runs a charity that can't seem to even comply with basic standards for the Charity Commission. There could be something suspect going on, and it is worth investigation. That is all I am saying. So Diane and Ngozi's relationship does predate Sister Space. However, on 15th of September 2015, or thereabouts, the store in which Diane Abbott and Ngozi, at that time known as Marlene, were stood in front of for a photograph was also called Maxine and Marlene's, as I can see in the photographs. The premises appears to be a store that sells various items and accessories with a clear reference to Africa and culture, or at least as far as the reference that a typical Brit may perceive it to be, i.e. not real African culture, but something that approximates it. We also know that Sister Space started the same year, and all evidence suggests that the name change to Ngozi Fulani from Marlene Headley happened on or very near the beginning of the charity Sister Space. I find this timing to be interesting and convenient, as if you were to submit an application for a grant under the name Marlene Headley, then you are unlikely to be perceived as being in a minority group on application alone, unlike Ngozi Fulani. It is my belief and my opinion that Ngozi Fulani adopted such a name for the purposes of appealing and presenting as a minority, with the aims to garner greater appeal in the subsequent demands for help of every kind that is to follow. In other words, when race grifters constantly go on about white privilege, it appears that actually, in the case of trying to get government money, having a quote-unquote white-sounding name is actually a detriment, and therefore she changed her name to Ngozi Fulani to help her chances in getting government funding for her minority charity. And this race grifting just frankly continues. So Hackney Council and Sister Space had some ongoing feuds, and in the interest of time I will just skip to them. So I will cut down on the melodramatics and put it to you that basically Sister Space were unhappy for a plethora of reasons, and demanded that Hackney Council provide solutions to any problem they had, otherwise it would be considered that the council was racist. This was an ongoing issue between the two sides that ultimately ended up in independent mediation, with both sides being legally represented and advised. Some of the benefits provided to Sister Space by Hackney Council included, but were not limited to, £35,000 on refurbishments to a property that Sister Space was resident in on a rent-free agreement from December 2019. 24-hour security was funded by the council, in addition to expenses met for removal and storage, installation of CCTV, installation of panic alarms, and an agreement between the two on an end date for temporary accommodation Sister Space was provided, while refurbishments were being carried out at the other property. Now, it might be fair to say, well, this is a charity that is trying to help domestic abuse victims, so security needs to be at the utmost importance for their own safety and their own well-being. And that might be a fair point. But wait, there's more. Sister Space repeatedly professed to Hackney Council that the premises was unsuitable because the security was inadequate. Now, I've spent a great deal of time watching hours upon hours upon hours of video footage. In most videos I've watched, the front door is left wide open, and Sister Space members are often sat outside selling donated items or twerking in the streets while blasting music outdoors. I neither claim to be a woman, nor do I claim to be a domestic violence victim. However, I imagine that if I were, then I probably wouldn't feel comfortable entering into a space that would be attracting a great deal of attention. Perhaps that's just me, but I wager I'm not the only one to be of this opinion. It is less a matter of culture and more a matter of professionalism. Also, owing to the nature of sexual violence, I'm not entirely certain that having women bend over and bounce their arse in the street is the correct image that this is setting. In other words, door wide open and sexually suggestive dances are being performed outside. This very much does seem like the place I would not want to go as a domestic violence victim. And they are clearly not too worried about security if this is the case. So the Twitter thread also goes into how a charity shop is not the right way to be using funds when trying to help people with domestic support. You don't see very many domestic support groups also running as charity shops. So it made Just Pikachu think, well, what exactly is being sold in these charity shops? Now, Sister Space have hours and hours of footage from around and inside and outside their charity shop, so James got a good look into this. In the footage, there were CDs and books that were provided to the charity shop from Dr. Sandra Richards. Sandra Richards is Ngozi Fulani's older sister, and she has a life coaching business. She sometimes appears in videos for Sister Space, though generally she is spamming her own social media with endless streams of inspirational quotes and radical perspectives on theology to do with race. Sandra is also of the opinion that she is in fact a divine god from an older life living among a weaker species. She identifies as African and resents anyone who considers her to be Black Caribbean or Black British, as she eloquently made it clear in an interview some years ago. It appears that this is a mad family of race grifters. I hope it does get a bit better. Watches are supplied from Mosaic. This is a now-dissolved business that owes hundreds of thousands to creditors, and its director is Kaze Antonio Fulani, otherwise known as Cas Fulani, Cas Headley, Cas Fulani Headley, etc., 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 or quite simply, this is Ngozi Fulani's son. Mosaic historically has went through a lot of different business concepts, from music to art to accessories. Mosaic has equally went through a lot of crowdfunding and fundraising schemes, a combination of direct donations from the public, as well as a Santander grant for £8,000, which was actually awarded to Jan Headley, Ngozi's daughter, in her final year of university, though she does not appear to have ever held any authoritative position within Mosaic ever. Just to briefly reflect, when I write Jan Headley, it could also mean Dejanomi, Dejan, Dejani, Dejand, and Headley or Fulani respectively, if you get the gist by now, hopefully. In other words, it appears that yes, they are not only race grifting, they are just fully bona fide grifters. An entire family of them from the looks of it. Yet we're not even at what I think is the worst part of this. Because the thread then goes through that some dolls are made by Ngozi Fulani's twin sister, called Maxine, who didn't change her name by the way. And the claim from her company is that half the cost for the sale of the doll is donated to Sister Space, and this is an important and critical piece of information because there is a direct contradiction. On one hand, the Sister Space charity shop is being presented to the general public, domestic violence victims, end users, and the Charity Commission via trustee annual reports that the funds from the sale are in control of the charity. And yet, on the other hand, it actually suggests that the proceeds from the sales at the charity shop go to the donors or the various businesses run by the various family members, on the word that half is then donated to the charity. For the information available online, I have not seen a single shred of evidence in the finances that there is a capital donated. More so, if it is indeed on the basis that proceeds from the sales are actually returned to the donor, then I cannot help but find it suspicious that every single business is being reported as destitute and in debt with very little, if any, gross earnings. In other words, all these businesses and the charity are keeping each other going because any money they make seems to just be passed around each one of the businesses and the charity, with the charity being the one where it all funnels into. While businesses that fail are simply just struck off and default, and the money doesn't need to be paid to the creditors due to bankruptcy. Now, at this point in the thread, he just goes through some of the public grants that have been sent to Sister Space. You can go through the details yourself, but I'll give you a quick summary. First off, it was the £12,000 mentioned earlier in the Times from the Greater London Assembly. This £12,000 was for peer research. That peer research truly is baffling how it came to £12,000, given they used a free SurveyMonkey and then tweeted out these SurveyMonkey links to get people to answer the survey. There's no way that cost £12,000. I've done it for free myself before. Next up was £950 from the National Lottery Community Funds. This was supposed to be going towards sewing classes, which to be fair it did. Though the idea was that they were free sewing classes for domestic abuse victims. Instead, Sister Space decided to charge people £5 an hour and to force them to bring their own materials, as Sister Space would not provide it, despite the fact that the sewing machines were already donated prior to the £950. Next up is £4,300 from the London Community Fund. The idea of this money was to be awarded for the purchase of essential items such as toiletries, food and hygiene products. The idea of this was to then donate these essential goods to domestic violence victims. Instead, James spotted in some of the footage that these toiletries and other essential goods were actually in the charity shop for marked up prices. Next up again from the London Community Fund, just 20 days after the £4,300 for necessary products was granted to them, they also got £22,500 to help set up a 24-hour assistance service hotline. So this would be money for 4 laptops, 4 mobile phones, and also to hire an administrative assistant. And according to James, the only person who received any training for anything like this was Ngozi's daughter, Gianomi. Yet there is no other record that he can find of Sister Space sending anyone for training for qualifications to have any sort of management in a 24-hour service. They also didn't spend the money wisely, it was used to buy a bunch of Apple products. At this point, James also foreshadows that yes, this was for a 24-hour service with an online presence, and foreshadows that this isn't actually the case of what was done with this money, and that there was no 24-hour service from Sister Space. Grant number 5 was £9,800 from the National Lottery Community Fund. Sister Space said this was to establish an online presence. However, as James points out, there is an old GitHub link that he used where you can find the original website that is, I believe, actually still in use at the time for Sister Space to have an online presence. So in other words, this grant was given to them and was shown to be used for absolutely nothing, since the online presence made absolutely no changes and they already had an online presence. The 6th one was Sister Space getting a grant of over £32,000 from the Department of Culture, Music and Sport, which was Tory run, of course. And this was 11th of August 2020, during the COVID pandemic when we were in lockdown. Now, the idea of this fund and grant was that charities that desperately needed emergency funding would apply for a grant, and it would obviously be given to them on the basis that they couldn't run without it. However, James manages to find the accounts for Sister Space for the year of 2020, and they actually made a surplus. They made a profit that year. So there was absolutely no need to get an emergency fund. They were apparently doing just fine, and probably a hell of a lot better than most other charities. Probably because, from what I can see here, they weren't acting like one. Grant number 7 was the £40,000 one from the Greater London Assembly again, and as mentioned in the article before, there is not much information on it. However, it does seem to have been listed under a different name, so as I said before, it might be an administration error. Penultimately, the London Community Fund gave them on 22nd of December 2020 £12,000. And once again, this is to buy essential products, food, hygiene products, all that stuff. But also, this fund was to help pay for the salaries of part-time domestic abuse advisors. However, from what James can see on the books, the only people who would even come close to these types of advisors are Ngozi herself, someone called Roseanne Lewis, who has many names apparently, and of course Ngozi's daughter Judomi. So the final one he goes through is a whopping £60,000 grant from the Comic Relief Fund. And this one appears to be the kill shot, so I will go through it in a bit more detail. The details on this grant are so wild that I'm genuinely struggling where to even begin explaining it. Anyway, let's start with the application to Comic Relief. This application is one that we can see submissioned by Sister Space. The Sister Space made a number of claims and splits it into 3 areas. The charity claimed that its core user group is in the 40 to 86 age range, and that part of the grant would be used to teach the people of an older age how to navigate around the internet and make use of online banking, etc. Second, the charity claimed that Comic Relief, that if it was awarded the grant for the sum of £60,000, then this would increase the outreach of Sister Space by at least 60%. However, there is no citation to support such a claim, and there are no details of any study commissioned by Sister Space that this even touched on the subject. And remember, Sister Space utilises SurveyMonkey, the free version, to conduct all its research thus far, and all of them are still available online as you are reading this tweet. You can even complete the survey and submit your results, and they are still live, despite being claimed on the website it ceased in 2020 to 2021. I have looked long and hard for any evidence or even mention of a study that focuses on outreach potential. At this point, I'm confident enough to state that it does not exist. I'm also confident to state that this is a random number plucked out of thin air, as there is precedent for this to happen elsewhere. As the start of this thread, I explained how Caroline Pidgeon made the claim to the London Assembly that Sister Space saw a 300% increase in service demand. I also earlier wrote that this figure is present in a trustee annual return, the one that was written by a moron. During a Hackney Council virtual meeting on the 27th of January 2021, Ngozi Fulani attended this meeting and stated that Sister Space had seen a 500% increase in service demand. That would mean a 200% jump in a single month. Elsewhere, the trustee annual report, Sister Space stated that its staff members halved and its workload doubled. Given that Sister Space has thus far opted to talk in percentiles, I shall translate. Sister Space has claimed that the service demand increased 200% and staff availability decreased 50%. We have very different figures, 500, 300 and 200%, all referencing service demand around the same time. And coincidentally and strangely, they always seem to round off to a perfectly whole figure. For that to happen on all 3 occasions, since we're on the topic of stats, it is nigh on impossible. But for a moment, let's roll with it. Let's pretend these figures are correct, and let's take the middle ground of 325%. If you recall to earlier in this thread, I made the point on referencing the staggering increase in admin costs, which was a year-on-year increase of 4,703%. And note how I didn't land on a perfectly whole number though. Even if the service demand increase figures were true, to be clear they are not, but let's pretend otherwise, it would still not correlate anywhere near a 4,703% increase in admin expenses. Furthermore, SisterSpace expressly stated that they had to suspend taking on new cases and only work with existing cases. This is put on record by SisterSpace to the Charity Commission, and I'm glad that I clocked it. If the charity was not taking on new cases, in what world is it possible for the service to demand increase and expenses to soar? The issue with lies and dirty accounts is that if you're going to attempt to try and pull it off, you have to have every single last detail and digit absolutely pristine, otherwise it all falls in on itself, and that is what is happening here, unfortunately. Now let's move on to the third point. Yes, we have only just covered point 2 there. SisterSpace has put a high price tag on the cost of a new website. Once again, the application is written to imply that a website is not suitable, but I will come to this in a moment because this is an area that I'm in a position to understand well. Now, before I go further here, I want to explain that I have previously reached out to a very small number of people that were involved in some way or another in anything SisterSpace could reasonably claim an expense on. This includes the new SisterSpace website, which is currently live right now. On the footer of this website, you will see that it is credited to the work of a business called Lex Design London Limited. My understanding is that this is a sole director limited company, and I spent some time watching some of her social media videos, where she showed herself working on the PC and the applications. The reason I watch them is because I am extremely familiar with a lot of the Adobe Creative Commons apps. I sent a private message to Alex Alyssa over Instagram, briefly explaining why I was contacting. I'm presenting the question if her business was commissioned to the tune of £60,000 or around that figure to build a website. I explained to Alexandra that the reason I was asking was to source more information for a better understanding, and the business that put its name against the work seemed like a sensible route to take. Alexandra declined to comment, which is fine, as it doesn't necessarily alter the detail I will go into next. In the world of web creation, for a custom-built website with some fancy features to a personalised specification, you're probably talking upwards of around £4,000, depending on the complexity of the work involved and the amount of code required, and given that this is my special area, yes, that sounds about right. However, Alexandra is a graphics artist, and from what I have seen, she is it at an amateur level of digital art. I'm making that opinion on the basis of a professional work. In videos Alexandra has posted, I can see that she uses Adobe Illustrator and Adobe Photoshop, both very common run-of-the-mill applications for any graphic designer, as expected. However, her knowledge is somewhat limited as she relies on licensed templates. The idea that you purchase a license, you then download the template, open it up in the application, and all the layers are preset, where you can then edit the graphic to suit your need. There's nothing wrong with this, but it is typically a method employed by those who are at an amateur level, which is rather common in those that are self-taught. Props being self-taught in the first place, though, etc. Anyway, so we've established that Alexandra can tamper with graphic design to a satisfactory level, but I would not regard it as a high-end professional level. However, Alexandra is most clearly not a coder, that I can outright demonstrate by pointing any one of you in the direction of pulling up the page source code on the SisterSpace website, and you will see the assets, multimedia file, pictures, etc. all stored on the Squarespace servers. He then goes into a description of Squarespace that I'm just going to summarise as, it is a free website template for people who don't particularly want to spend an awful lot on a professional website designer, and instead just want a fairly generic but user-friendly way to make a website. So this Lex Designs London website that SisterSpace use is something that they could have made themselves for effectively free. So there is a cost for Squarespace for the hosting. However, you can navigate to the Squarespace's website and see the price for yourself. It is very cheap and reasonable, especially if you're utilising a package that comes with e-commerce solutions, online payments, as that saves you the trouble of having to set up an account with a merchant bank and payments processing company and so on. SisterSpace's new website is in fact actually a technical downgrade on what they originally had, though I will concede that the new website is more aesthetically pleasing, but on a technical point, the original website wins hands down. So basically they went for a graphics designer to make a website rather than carrying on and trying to adapt the source code they already have, because they didn't want to spend £60,000 on a grant. To put it into perspective, you can go onto Fiverr and easily find anyone who would do the exact same job for a Fiverr. It is super quick, easy, and does not take a lot of time at all, and that's why people price it so cheaply, because it is easy money. Consequently, it is also why so many offer template installation services. So with that, the question is, what happened to that £60,000? Well, given that James has compiled all this into PDF and has sent it off to the Charity Commission for investigation, we can only wait for that report to come out. But as you can see, I went through a lot more of that Twitter thread than I actually intended to, but the rabbit hole just got deeper, and deeper. And given in total we're looking at over £100,000 of taxpayer money going to this charity, if it turns out it has all been for fraud, yes, I absolutely want Sister Space closed down and for them to have to pay the money back. But it was unfortunately something we are going to have to wait on, but that thread was an absolute concise explanation of how Sister Space seems to be a complete grifter charity. And if it gets investigated and turns out there's no wrong, then my god, that is one hell of a questionable situation they're in. But I don't think that's the way it's going to turn out. So we're just going to have to wait and see how that particular investigation goes. I have followed James on Twitter and will keep an eye on any updates from the Charity Commission from there. But with that, I thought I'd just give you a weekend white pill. It appears that a race grifter is going to be taken to the cleaners, and we can all be happy about that, assuming that it all goes well. But in the meantime, that's everything I had for you today. So as usual, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.